Hello and welcome back to my series of videos where we create the freeCodeCamp Pomodoro Clock. This video will be a little bit more advanced than my usual videos as we add TypeScript to create React app. But I implore you to stay tuned and challenge yourself to see if you understand the TypeScript concepts. You don't need to try adding it to your application yet, but just watch the video and see what TypeScript can offer you. In addition to learning about TypeScript, we'll be fixing a bug in our current code that Ben actually found. So he says, once session changes to break, it doesn't go back to session, it just stays in break. So we'll go ahead and check out that bug. Before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, follow me on Twitter, on dev.to, on Instagram, etc., yada yada yada. But for now, let's get to some code. Of course, as usual, before we do anything, let's start our development server. Alright, here's our application, all styled with Tailwind CS. It works as planned. Let's go ahead and try to recreate the bug that Ben actually found. Let's go into our some code where we put in some console logs to debug this code. Ben pointed out that this part isn't firing correctly. Basically, when it becomes break, it stays break. It does not go back to session. In this set time left, let's go ahead and console log out the current session type. And the reason I'm console logging that variable is because that's the variable inside of the condition statement. So I want to see exactly what that variable is when we run the code. Back in our browser, let's open up our console. Bring this all the way down to 1 just for quick debugging purposes and see what happens. Alright, we'll see here that current session type is session, which means it turns into break. But you'll see again here that current session type is session again. And then current session type is session again. So what's happening here either is that this set current session type is not being called, or this current session type variable is not referring to the variable outside of the function. So I have a feeling that once this function here is created, it locks in the value of current session type, which is initialized to session. That initial value of current session type is locked into that function and remains session. It never ever changes. What we'll do to fix that is take out all of this logic here and move it into a use effect that listens to the time left variable. Remember that use effect is a React hook that we use to subscribe to any changes of a variable. So let's listen to time left changes. If it is 0, we play the audio and change session to break or break to session. So with that, let's go ahead and write our use effect hook. And as we said, we're subscribing to changes on time left. If time left is 0, so let's take this here, left equals 0, let's go ahead and play the audio element as we have down here. And if the current session type is session, and now this current session type here is definitely referring to this current session type up top. It's not encapsulated or locked into any specific value. So if the current session type is session, set current session type to break and set time left to break length. And this logic here is the same logic that we have down here. Right? Set current session to break and set time left to break length. Else, if current session type is break, set current session type to session and set time left to session length. Now, you'll see when I save, my React hooked ESLint puts all of these values in the dependencies array, and that's because we're using all of these values in our function. That's basically the right way to use the dependencies array. Put everything you use inside of it. If you haven't yet, make sure you're linting your files to get these changes. Now, with that, we can just have previous time left and return prev time left -1 and delete all this logic here. There we go. Let's see if that fixed it. All right, there we go. It's changing from break to session and session to break correctly. Back and forth, back and forth. It's exactly what we want. To recap, we're using useEffect to listen to any time left changes. If the time left is 0, we'll play the audio and we'll change session to break and break to session accordingly. And again, remember this useEffect will fire whenever any of these values in this dependency array changes. However, we guarded this function with the if time left equals 0, so all of this will only really happen when the time left is equal to 0. And of course, down here, we got rid of all the extra logic, all the duplicated logic that we wrote up and brought up into our useEffect function. You're probably wondering, why learn TypeScript? I already have enough trouble learning JavaScript. Now you're throwing TypeScript at me. What goes on? Again, you should at least be exposed to TypeScript and what it has to offer. I'm not telling you to use it in all your projects right now. I'm not telling you to change all your projects and add TypeScript to them. I'm just asking you to take a look at TypeScript and see what it has to offer. Basically, it forces you to think about what type of data is living in a variable that you initialize. Is it a string? Is it a number? It also yells at you for inconsistent code while you're coding. It's yelling at you while you're coding. Now, isn't that better than getting yelled at when you run the app? Errors when you're running the app may crash the entire website. It may crash your entire web application. So it's better to be yelled at for inconsistent code that is probably full of bugs as you code. That way you can fix it before you run the application. Now, let's go into the first bullet where you have to understand what type of data is in the variable. Here I am in the TypeScript playground. If you want to go ahead and play around with TypeScript, go to www.typescriptlang.org/play. Now you see here that we have a variable called message, which we say is a string. Now let's make this a let and just say this message here is a string. Now what if I wanted to make message equal to 1 down here? I'm already getting yelled at. TypeScript is telling me, wait a minute, you told me this will be a string. Now is it a number? You see, type 1 is not assignable to type string. Let's take another example. Let's say we have a user here with a name of Philip and a age of 31. And now we say user.last name equals magenta. Now it's saying, wait a minute, last name doesn't exist on that object. What gives? There's a bunch of examples I can do to show you the power of JavaScript. Let's say colors equals red, blue, and green. Notice these are all strings. And now I say colors.push 2. Now you'll see again, 2 is not assignable to the parameter of type string. It knows, it inferred, I didn't even tell it that this is a string of array of strings. It inferred that, and it's telling me, it's yelling at me that 2 is not a string. So again, you want to be yelled at this point because this is likely a mistake on your part. So you can actually change it to, let's say, 2, and it won't yell at you anymore. Now, let's go into our code and see how we can add TypeScript to our code. Alright, so in the Create React App documentation, you'll see that there is a section for adding TypeScript. If we started a new Create React App project, if we wanted to start it with TypeScript, we would just copy and paste this top line here with the TypeScript template. However, since we already have a Create App project initialized, we need to copy and paste this command here. If you're using npm, go ahead and copy that top line. I'll copy the bottom line and add that. I'm adding all of this to my development dependencies. If you want to add it to your development dependencies of npm install, just type in -- save dev, just like this. So yours would look like npm install save dev TypeScript yada yada yada. Now that we have TypeScript installed, to use it we'll have to rename all of our JS and JSX files to have a TS or TSX file extension. So break here will have a TSX and so on and so forth. We'll take it one file at a time, fixing any broken TypeScript code as we go. So for break, nothing here is broken. However, I do want to tell my code that break here is a React functional component, and we do so as follows. Now you'll see that it doesn't know what break length is here. It doesn't know what decrement break length by 1 minute or increment break length by 1 minute is here. So to fix this, I'm actually going to create a type called props. Now this will describe the shape of the props that I expect to go into break. So we have break length. Actually, let's copy and paste all of this from up here. We have a break length. We have decrement break length by 1 minute, and decrement and increment break length by 1 minute will be a function that takes in no parameters and returns a void type. And that's how we write that in TypeScript here. There's no parameters that it takes in, and a void type is return. Break length here will be an integer, which is a number in JavaScript. And to use these props in our React FC type, just have an angle bracket, props, and close angle brackets. Now you see that TypeScript does not complain anymore. Let's go back into our components and do the same thing for session. So session.tsx, and honestly, I'm going to go into break here and copy and paste the props, just like that, and copy and paste these names. And as we did before, react.fc time left very similarly. Down here, we'll add a type called props. We'll copy and paste these here. Timer label is a string. Time left is a number. The start stop button label is a string. Handle start and reset button click are both functions that return void. They don't return anything, so we say they return void. And we go back up here, react.fc props. Close that. And we have an error here. You'll see that I forgot to rename this to TypeScript. And TypeScript is actually smart enough to tell me types can only be used in TypeScript files. So let's go ahead and rename time left to a .tsx file, and there are no more complaints. Amazing. Let's go into our break session UI.js and rename it a .tsx. Let's go ahead and react.fc here, and here we have children. Children is part of the react.fc type, so we don't have to worry about adding types for children. Children is part of the React spec. It's part of the functional component type. It comes out of the box. What we do have to worry about are these props here. Basically, these props are just forwarded to the div here on line 5. Now, what props does this div take? How can we define it? Good question. A good way to figure out how to basically extract the props from this div is hover over it with your cursor in VS Code. Now you'll see that this is a type called JSX intrinsic elements a .div, and its props that it takes is this right here, this entire string. So let's actually copy and paste that, put that in here, save it, and you'll see that we no longer get complaints. Now we want to do something similar here for this p tag. So we have react.fc, and this here is very similar, except it uses the paragraph element instead of the HTML div element here. Very similar here. We can actually copy and paste the same thing because it's using the paragraph element types. Very similarly down here, react.fc, hover over button, and you'll see that we have something super similar. React.detailed HTML props, yada yada yada, and up here react.fc, and we'll use the div props. So TypeScript is no longer yelling at us. Now let's go back into our app.tsx, where I'm sure we have TypeScript yelling at us a bunch of times. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and restart the server. I do want to show you one thing. The TypeScript configuration will actually be created on the spot by create react app, and you'll see that with this tsconfig we have a bunch of options. We have strict is true, which you should try to keep on. However, that does mean that you are playing in hard mode. It's a lot harder to keep up with all the TypeScript errors. So let's actually go back and fix the error that it's complaining about. It's telling us that there is no declaration file, And a declaration file is nothing but TypeScript definitions for a package for the moment duration format package. So to fix this, we actually would have to install types moment duration format. It actually tells us right there, npm install types duration moment format. So let's go ahead and add that. I'll add it to my development dependencies, and let's look at time left and see if it's still complaining. All right, so no more complaints there. You'll see that it's also complaining about a type of import. It's not assignable to parameter, etc., etc. This is actually a very, very difficult error to fix. So I, for this video, will actually ignore the next line here. So just add a comment that says @tsignore, and it'll ignore the TypeScript error. So for those TypeScript errors that are a big headache and will take a long, long time to fix, ignore them for now. Fix them later. Do not get stuck on them. However, don't leave them in your production code. Fix them as quickly as possible. Consider it to be tech debt. Now let's save that, see what other complaints we have, and see now our application is successfully running. Let's rename app.jsx to app.tsx. Go back to our server, restart it because it says no such file. It needs to basically reset the cache of files that we had before, and now you see a bunch of errors down here. The first one is saying that audio element and .current might be null. And why is it saying that? Because we actually initialized it to null. They're saying that this might be null, and this is going to create a runtime error, which is what we didn't want. Remember, we don't want errors when it's running. We want errors now. So to get rid of this error, we can put a question mark here, which means that .current will only be evaluated if audio element exists. Now .play will still be evaluated if current does not exist, so we'll also need a question mark here. Now you'll see the .play property does not exist on type never. What this means is that we forgot to type this audio element up here. So to get the type for that audio element, let's scroll on down to our audio element, and we'll see that it is an HTML audio element. You'll see it up here. Let's copy and paste that and bring that right up over into our type, and you'll see that play does exist on our audio element. So again, to recap, we had this code here, and it complained to us that this might be null. To fix that, we added question marks to say, if it's null, don't do it. If it isn't null, continue down the chain. This is called optional chaining. Now we have an error down here, which is telling us that this type is not assignable to null. We told it up here that interval ID will be null. We didn't tell TypeScript what the type of interval ID would be. And again, very similarly to useRef, we'll put angle brackets after useState, and we'll tell it that interval ID will be a type of Nodejs dot, how do we do this? Nodejs dot timeout, or null. And where did I get this Nodejs dot timeout from? I got it from down here, where we actually set the interval ID. If we hover over new interval ID, it'll tell us it's a type of Node.js .timeout. Now, if we scroll up here, the clear interval function cannot take a type of null. And it's warning us that interval ID, it might be null. So only do this if interval ID is not equal to null. And you'll see that this TypeScript error goes right away. This error down here, remember, it's the same optional chaining error that we had up above. And this error here is fixed once we surround this with a if clause. Do notice that not equal to null, we could just put if interval ID, if it exists anywhere. So we don't need this not equal to null. We're just saying if interval ID exists, then do it. Let's open up our compiler, and you'll see that we compiled successfully. We have type safe code in strict mode. I do want to show you the power of TypeScript. So remember in break, where we said break length is actually a number. If we hover over it, it tells us that break length is a number. What if we pass it a string? Let's pass it a string, and you'll see that it's already complaining to us. It's saying that it expected break length to be of type number, not type string. So the type string that we're passing into break length is not assignable to the type number that TypeScript expected. Additionally, what if we have a break label here and we put break label? Now it's complaining to us that, wait a minute, break label does not exist on this break. I understand that these errors may be hard to read, but if you scroll down, usually the bottom sentence kind of tells you what's going on. Property break label does not exist on the type of the break component. You'll see that now TypeScript is all over our application. We can sleep soundly knowing that we are type safe, knowing that if we pass invalid props into our components, we'll get yelled at. And to be honest, we should get yelled at if that happens. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, this is the Web Dev Coach signing off. Peace.